25th. I represent the 25th Assembly District. That's representing portions of the East Bay and the South Bay. That's 5 cities in it, in Alameda and Santa Clara County. I was elected in 2020 during this very historic year, of course, of many different very different things are happening. But I also was very proud of the fact that I won despite being outspent 15-1, and despite not taking a single cent of corporate money, corporate political special interest money. And this is a pledge that I continue to keep, and it's something I'm very happy that California Progressive Alliance has built into their endorsement process, where they also want to endorse other corporate-free candidates. And I also am holding that standard of my endorsements too. When people seek my endorsement, I also say, well, do you want to stick to the corporate-free pledge just as I do? Because it's important that we keep sharing these ideals and these values with everyone, because the only way we can build progressive power is by sharing progressive power and sharing these values. So on the first day in office on December 7th, nearly 3 months ago, I introduced Assembly Bill 20. Now, Assembly Bill 20 does one very simple thing. It bans all candidates in California, whether you're running for city council, school board, state legislature like myself, or for governor, from taking any direct corporate special interest money, any direct money like that. And it's very, very important, because if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, especially in the Bay Area where we are, there are corporations, especially the tech corporations, that have billions of dollars. And when they donate the $4,900, which is objectively still a lot of money, but not very much money to them, it's a drop in the bucket. But if you think about that return on investment they have, that influence that they have now access, is very, very destabilizing. And I always talk about how the real or perceived influence of money in politics, especially in corporations, is very dangerous. Because even if, in the best case scenario, where a politician says this money has no effect on them whatsoever, they just take it because it's the rules of the game, fine, it still has a perceived influence, right? It's very hard to say where on February 1st or something, this money came in from this petrol company, from this petrochemical company, and then they took a vote on this on a bill related to plastics in our environment, and they might have voted more favorably. It's very hard to argue one way or the other if there was influence or not, right? But we see those 2 data points, and however you feel about it, it undermines the integrity of our decision-making process. Because even if that legislator made a different decision based on different facts, even having that perceived influence really puts our whole democracy at risk. Because if the people feel, as I think they rightfully do, that our decisions are bought and influenced, why should they believe in our democracy? And that's why it's important to pass AB 20 to change the rules of the game. Because when we make it so that it's mandatory that no one can take corporate special interest money, at least then we can free ourselves from that. Because I understand there are folks who definitely feel more nervous about the way money in politics is, and they need that resources. But if we even out the playing field, then it should be fine for everyone. In fact, federally, congressional candidates and presidential candidates already do this. They cannot take corporate money directly from corporations. And this is what my bill is purposely trying to do, aligning us with the federal standards. So it's nothing crazy, it's nothing radical that no one has figured out and solved, but it's so important. Because if you think about it, even in Assembly District 25, it is home to one of the most infamous companies in the world, Tesla. So my bill would ban Tesla from donating directly to candidates. Maybe you have different feelings about Tesla, but I don't take money from Tesla either. But it's important to make sure that there's no direct connection between our people who make decisions and the corporations that we hopefully are hoping to govern and make them pay their fair share. And with that freedom and that flexibility, it has given me, just an example, the ability to go out and hold these folks accountable. I am a proud co-author on our single-payer healthcare effort to challenge the healthcare industry. I'm a proud co-author on raising the corporate tax to fund our homelessness programs to challenge corporations. And I'm a proud author soon, hopefully, soon in a week or so, of the wealth tax on extremely, extremely wealthy multimillionaires in California. And that's because we have the flexibility to do that. And we have the commitment to serving our communities and not taking these corporate special interest money. Because the more time that someone is committed to taking this money and really feeding into an unhealthy system, the less time it is to go out and meet with the community and do the work that actually matters. And that's why it's so important to stop this avenue of influence as much as possible. And hopefully, if you all believe in Assembly Bill 20 as well, really hope that you will go out there, organize and support it, and really let let your community know why it's important that we must cut off the lifeline, or we must cut off that line between corporate special interests and our decision-making process, because it goes way beyond the elections, obviously, where people perhaps we don't want to represent our communities get in, but then in office too, when they're making decisions about our healthcare, our housing, even our schools and our tax code. We don't want a system that represents and upholds only one minority, right? And that's the minority of the super wealthy corporates, right? We don't want that to be how the government works. It should be working for everyone. And that's why Assembly Bill 20 is so important. And I'm really glad to have the support of Movie, M-O-V-I. I don't know how you say it out loud. I only read it, but I'm really happy to have it on. Michelle's going to be talking more, and I'm going to be working a lot more with partners. You're going to hear from like Trent, Lange, the Clean Money Campaign, and really making sure that once we get rid of that money, we also empower more residents to support candidates they care about, and even the playing field that way as well. So really happy to be on here and talking about the clean money future we have for California.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember Alex Lee. Thank you for your efforts towards electoral reform. I know you can't stay with us due to other obligations, but we very much appreciate your time today. Next, I would like to welcome Michele Sutter. She is the director and co-founder of MOVI, Money Out, Voters In, and she led the 2014 and 2016 Overturned Citizens United Act through the California Legislature Watch. So this actually successfully passed in November 2016. MOVI also happens to be an organizational sponsor of AB 20 that you just heard about from Assemblymember Lee. So Michele will elaborate on that bill, but also she'll start us with a discussion on election integrity. Welcome, Michele. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Nasim. And thank you, Assemblymember Lee, for that terrific presentation. Assemblymember Lee's AB 20 is a critical and necessary step to combat California's money problem, a problem that's currently growing unabated. And MOVI is excited to be the organizational sponsor of AB 20, the Corporate Free Elections Act. And we will need your help to get it passed, because money doesn't cede ground ever if they can help it. And the ground is already tilted in money's favor. We will have to, as I say, overwhelm our legislators to pass AB 20. And we have overwhelmed them before, and I hope you'll join us in doing that again. Nasim, I think we'll be posting information about how everyone can be involved in this, and I'll talk about that a bit later. But first, I'd like to take us on a brief tour about how we lost our election integrity, look at how that landscape is changing for good and ill, and then get to what we can do to help. Money in politics is at the root of everything that ails us in America. And at the root of money's expanded dominance over our politics and policies is the Supreme Court of the United States. Assemblymember Lee was about 4 years old when the SCOTUS told America that it did not actually matter who won the 2000 presidential election. They were going to give it to George W. Bush. The court broke our confidence in our own election integrity with that decision, and we've never faced that trauma as a nation. I think of it as our PTSD moment. The Democratic Party couldn't respond and has not been the same since. Corporate media, billionaire owned and endlessly in pursuit of profit, did not do the job the framers had in mind for the Fourth Estate in response to such an outrage. Fox News, which had recently captured the lion's share of cable viewers with the hunting party sent after Bill Clinton, and Rush Limbaugh and his 14 million listeners, a real number at that point, applauded the court's decisions, and Republicans took it as a license to keep cheating. If you're too young to remember the Republican cheating in Florida 2000, do a search on the Brooks Brothers Rebellion. And if you add Roger Stone's name to that search, he'll show up because he was there too. And of course, it turns out Al Gore actually won Florida. Here's our first screen share. Florida recounts make Gore winner. This is from January 2001, and we could have waited another month to get it right, but the SCOTUS stepped into a process they had no right to get into, and Sandra Day O'Connor said as much to a New York Times reporter in 2013. The first paragraph of that article reads, "Now she tells us, more than 12 years after the fact, retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor said it was probably a mistake for the Supreme Court to hear Bush v. Gore and anoint George W. Bush as President of the United States." Yes, Justice O'Connor, it was a mistake. I'll try not to heap scorn on her for not having the integrity to stand up to Antonin Scalia when she knew it was wrong and instead chose to go along, as she would be orders of magnitude better than any of the doctrinal scriveners the Federalist Society have put on the court since she retired in 2006. But she could have saved a lot of lives. So this event, the Bush v. Gore ruling, is like the block of amber we're all trapped in, both electorally and congressionally. Republicans cheat, Democrats surrender before the fight, and if it's a close call, the SCOTUS is going to side with the money. This is why organizations like the California Progressive Alliance form and why they're critical. Go to The Intercept. Great, scroll down there. Thank you. I like this headline from The Intercept, published on November 10th, 2018, when there were still races that were too close to call in Florida, Georgia, and Arizona. Republicans won 3 out of 4 of those contested races, by the way. Arizona elected Democrat Kristen Sinema. And I do want to spend another moment, excuse me, on electoral cheating and play you a clip from the man I call the godfather of voter suppression, Paul Weyrich. This clip is 40 seconds long. Do we have it?
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Yeah, leave you a minute to see the Heritage Foundation, moral majority. You know, if you're wondering where the commingling of voter suppression and the theocratic state first meet in post-civil rights era, post-Vietnam protests America, it's with this guy. And the plan has always been about manipulating the voting apparatus to retain power with a minority. Trump said it a few months ago, right? If we have those levels of mail-in ballots, we will never see another Republican elected again. The lawyer arguing before the SCOTUS just this past week was asked by Amy Barrett what the GOP interest was in the Arizona voting rights case, and this was his response. Can they see that? Right? They need these restrictions in order to compete with Democrats. So there's no longer any attempt to hide behind a curtain. And that's actually a really good thing, because even the not necessarily progressive Democrats are beginning to understand the seriousness of the threat. It really is democracy or not. And money is at the root of all of it. According to the Brennan Center, as of a couple of days ago, there are 253 bills in 43 states trying to make sure there's never another election like 2020. Turnout hurts seditionists, and they know it. Mail-in ballots proved to be an electoral panacea. With all the shenaniganizing that has gone on since 2000 in our elections, which I won't get into more because we'd need a few hours, but without mail-in ballots, in my opinion, Trump would have gotten a second term. He wasn't meeting with Karl Rove multiple times for nothing. So mail-in ballots made Biden's win too big to steal. And Georgia delivered a miracle, overcoming the voter suppression let loose on Georgia after the SCOTUS gutted the pre-clearance requirements in Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And I expect Pedro will have something to say about that. So now here we are. Democrats have both chambers of the US Congress and the presidency, and California Democrats have a supermajority in the California legislature at one of those moments in our history when democracy hangs in the balance. And this is where we come in. I expect we're all disgusted but not surprised that the corporate Democrats in the US Senate didn't join the House in voting to raise the minimum wage. But the House did vote to raise the minimum wage. And the clear and unapologetic voices of the people who crashed the two corporate parties since Reagan trapped in amber tableau are gaining ground quickly, and they have skills. Alex Lee is one of them. AB 20, the Corporate Free Elections Act, is a really good bill, and I hope you will join us in helping to pass it. You may be told as you talk to people about AB 20 that it's not constitutional because of Citizens United. Ordinarily in organizing, you don't want to give air to the opposition argument, but in this case, it's warranted because the argument is nonsense. As recently as May 2019, the Supreme Court declined to take up the case, which sought to overturn the Massachusetts ban on corporate donations directly to candidates. The fact that the case concerned Massachusetts is important. There are 22 states which prohibit corporations from donating directly to candidates. Among those 22 states, there are only 2 which prohibit corporate contributions but allow union contributions, Minnesota and Massachusetts. The court would not touch the corporation federation conversation. AB 20 would bring California in line with Massachusetts and Minnesota. It would turn off one of the 3 spigots of money in our state and local into our state and local legislators. Data shows that when candidates and legislators cannot accept corporate donations, they are more likely to legislate to the benefit of their constituents. And that is exactly what we want. I'm not going to kid you and say that AB 20 will not be a heavy lift, because it will. But if we can do it, we can change California politics, and we'll have built a coalition to achieve more campaign finance reforms to address the other 2 spigots of massive cash in California, PACs and super PACs. We need to make noise. And as I said earlier, we will need to overwhelm our California legislators. And if you'd like to help, there are lots of ways to do this. And perhaps, Nassim, we'll get into that a bit later as we take questions. But essentially, it will be about, if you are part of an organization that would like to endorse, please be in touch with me. Individuals can also have a big impact on that. If you are part of a political club, those are especially highly prized, as the California Democratic Party has written resolution after resolution after resolution about getting money out of politics. And we believe that that will be an incredibly important avenue of endorsement for us to pursue. And with that, thank you, Nassim, and on to Pedro.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to Thank you. Thanks for unsharing. I wanted to assure you, Michelle, and also our audience that there are a lot of links that have been dropped in the chat. So certainly including Michelle's contact as well as the sample letter for endorsement. So hopefully we'll get a lot of endorsements today. Thank you so much, Michelle, for really talking further about AB 20 and also reminding us how we got here. Next, I'd like to welcome Pedro Hernandez. He is the Senior Policy Coordinator at Fair Vote, which is a national nonpartisan organization that advocates for electoral reform policies. Pedro had previously served as the Deputy Director of Fair Vote, California, and he has practiced law, actually specializing in claims under California Voting Rights Act. And he has also served as the Editor-in-Chief of the Hastings Race and Poverty Law Journal. Today, Pedro will speak about the Fair Representation Act. Welcome, Pedro.
Hey, folks. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm born and raised in California, and I'm actually from Watsonville, California, but I work for a national organization. I'm currently based out of the Bay Area. I'm going to talk today about the Fair Representation Act, which is a piece of legislation that Fair Vote is supporting to kind of rethink the way we think about congressional representation. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so I think you should be able to see a Fair Vote logo. Okay, I think it's really important to think about the context of today and where we're finding ourselves after January 6th. I think one can't really think about reforms without really thinking about where we're finding ourselves in terms of the polarization that we're seeing and the need to find a way forward. Our problems in our country and our democracy are deep and complex, and it goes beyond just electoral rules. And we need to find a way to make democracy work. We need to change campaign incentives and work towards more open and inclusive rules. I think, what does this look like in terms of resolving our crisis? Fair Vote thinks that we need to foster an atmosphere of collaboration across the table. There have to be political consequences for divisiveness for the sake of divisiveness, which is a feature of our winner-take-all election system. We need to find a way to envision a way to have elections where baseless attacks actually work against candidates, low-blow attacks. And we need to offer voters choice, more choice, and provide better links between voters and government. I think it's important to really think about what our current electoral system is. It's a winner-take-all system. Consider it, the 435 representatives are elected to the House of Representatives via single-member districts, something that only became law in 1967 through the single-member mandate. Under this system, an overwhelming majority of voters live in districts locked up for one political party or the other. And these district lines fundamentally decide who wins and who loses. Even when statewide results swing to a different party, it tends to be out of step with the will of voters in that state. You look at Wisconsin, the state went for Democrats, but a majority of the seats went for the Republicans. Why is this? Well, some people think it's partially due to gerrymandering. It's partially due to single member elections and kind of only providing binary choice. But under these single member district rules, it tends to be very vulnerable to vote splitting. Voters have to engage in strategic voting in party primaries, or depending on, you might see blanket primaries in some states. California has that, right? We have top two, where all of the parties are in one ballot and one primary. And that led to some very close calls in 2018, folks might remember, where there was some real fear that some Democrats might be locked out entirely out of the general election ballot. There's a lack of competition. We have successfully predicted most of the time what the congressional makeup will be during these congressional elections, because it is, these seats tend to be largely non-competitive. They're safely drawn seats for folks. And if electeds aren't accountable to voters, they're kind of enveloped in this feedback loop that makes them more extreme. The incumbent's only fear is to be out-primaried by a more radical element of their own party, leading to more polarized positions. And this is one of the reasons why gerrymandering is a threat to our democracy. What we're seeing right now is that under the current winner-take-all rules, a minority force can gain disproportionate power within a party and become intolerant of rules and accountability, and use scare tactics to stoke up divisions and fire up their own voting base. It doesn't really take much to go back in history to see that happen, sadly. What are we envisioning, though? We're envisioning something that is fair representation for everyone. If you are 25% of the vote, you should get 25% representation. Our Congress should be more reflective of the people. At its heart, this is what we are thinking about when we think about proportional representation. And it wasn't a thought that is new. In fact, John Adams once said that the Congress should be in miniature an exact portrait of the people at large. It should think, feel, reason, and act like them. And the House of Representatives was very much founded in this idea. We know that the voters' will was especially important to the framers, since the House of Representatives was the only directed elected body of government at that time when the Constitution was drafted. The Senate only became something voters voted on in the early 1900s. The Fair Representation Act, what is it? Well, there's three main set of elements, and then we've added a fourth one in the new iteration that we're going to be introducing in the next couple of weeks. It is proportional form of ranked choice voting. So it's multi-member districts for Congress that are drawn by independent redistricting commissions. So what does that mean? It means that instead of a single member district, we'd have a larger multi-member district that elects 3 to 5. And what it takes to win for a candidate is, at least when you elect 3, at least 25% of support for that candidate. When you elect 5, it's at least a sixth. Why is the math that way? Well, I'll get to that, but I want to go through these elements a little more deeply. Multi-member districts, essentially, how it would change fundamentally the way we envision representation. Well, take, for example, Louisiana. Right now, it is projected outcomes. Its state partisanship is 40-60, yet the current representation is 1 Democrat, 5 Republicans. Our projections suggest that under the Fair Representation Act, you would probably get 2 Democrats and 4 Republicans, which is more in line with the statewide makeup of Louisiana. This could mean more rural Democrats getting elected, and perhaps some more libertarian thinking urban parties getting elected as well. One of the things that is being thought about when we're thinking about how we should think of Congress is like, should we expand the size of the House, which is actually something that we're toying around with as well. What is proportional ranked choice voting? It's single transferable vote is another name for it. It's a multi-winner ranked choice voting. It's ranked choice voting. The way it looks like for voters is very much the same as single seat ranked choice voting. The ballot looks the same. But rather than electing one winner who represents one district, we elect multiple winners in that larger district. Everyone's vote is only one vote, though. But if your first choice can't win, your vote can count for your second. And what these thresholds look like, right? How much of the vote do you need to win to get elected? We know that for single seat ranked choice voting, which is what the state of Maine passed statewide, and what now 5 Bay Area cities now have, well, 4 Bay Area cities have. Eureka just passed single seat ranked choice voting as well. For one, the number of votes it takes to win is 50% plus 1. Well, the number of votes that takes to win goes down to a third plus one when you elect two. Why is it a third plus one? Because it's mathematically impossible for a third candidate to have that same amount. When you elect three, it's 25% plus one. Why? Because it's mathematically impossible for a fourth candidate to have that amount. So the more seats you elect at once, the lower the threshold it is to win. And when you do that, it makes it more likely that you're going to be able to get someone elected that, for example, in Louisiana, you may not be able to draw two districts that Democrats are majority. It may be that Democrats are kind of scattered across the state. With a plan like this, covering a larger geographical space, those voters would be able to elect a candidate of choice. We look at Texas, District 6. This is just a projection of what it could look like in District 6 in Texas. 5 seats with the threshold being over 6th, right? So that's 16.67%. We are projecting 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And this is a better reflection of what the voters are in that particular part of Texas as well. What are some of the benefits to something like this? We think it would be more meaningful for voters to be able to look at the Congress and have someone that truly represents them. It's a sad thought in our democracy that because of geography, voters are sometimes locked out of representation. That Democrat that lives in a Republican district, or that Green Party person locked in a Democratic district, or even that Republican locked in a Democratic district in certain places like Massachusetts, for example. I'm trying to be inclusive in talking about this. So, and it would be fair outcomes for folks. It would really mean that these candidates would be accountable to actual voters rather than the politicians choosing who their voters are in certain states. It would be much harder to gerrymander a multi-member district than a single member district as well. And this is not something new. A lot of Western democracies have adopted forms of representation like this. Ireland and Northern Ireland have this form of representation. New Zealand as well uses this for local elections. So there's Australia, Malta, and Scotland as well. I went to Davis. We use this form of representation to elect our student senate. I know that's not government, but I think it is meaningful that we do use these forms of representation as a way to bring more voices to the table. In fact, this form of representation recently passed in the city of Albany, California, with 73% voter support. There's this threat of authoritarianism that we are experiencing right now. And I think that the danger really stems from minority forces gaining disproportionate power. And like I said earlier, becoming intolerant of rules and stoking divisions. And these winner-take-all rules really award and entrenches this disproportionate power. The FRA and proportional representation won't address our deep and complex issues, but it'll at least root decisions and policies closer to people. Successful candidates have to appeal to different bases of support, or at least find a way to ask for second and third choice votes, and elect candidates based on vote share, thus limiting the influence of these forces. The thresholds are, a sixth of the vote. They're not getting down to like 5%. So we're hoping that, it's going to be parties and candidates who are able to rally enough support to get elected. There's actually a really compelling argument about what this would mean for racial equity as well. We know that, here's a quote from Lange. It'll take me, I think, too long to read this, but she reflects a lot about what it means to have representation in the consideration of Voting Rights Act remedies generally, and how this really forces us to reflect on what democracy means and what elections mean, and how we should think about access for all voters, especially because of the accident's geography, can't vote for a candidate they feel best represents their interests. I think this is compelling in these times as well. Some people say like, oh, segregation's getting, like, it's not as bad as it used to be. And actually, no, there's actually a lot of research to suggest that it's not getting more integrated. In fact, you're seeing it get worse in terms of neighborhood segregation and immigrant clusters and immigrant enclaves across cities. And in fact, there is a line of cases under the Voting Rights Act, the Dillard line of cases that considers modified at-large remedies, which now include things like proportional ranked choice voting. And like I said earlier, Albany, California recently passed this. When we studied Albany, it turns out that the ranked choice voting thresholds, that 25% or a third of the vote, makes representation much more accessible for the Latinx and API communities there. And then if you drew districts, it would pack renters into a super renter district, limiting their ability to influence the citywide election. Because renters are about 400 voters short of reaching parity with homeowner voters in Albany. If you drew districts, you would limit their influence. But this would actually allow them to have a more competitive say and maybe even a chance to get a majority of the city council at some point in the future. And here's kind of a map of Albany showing kind of where that coalition between API and Latinx voters are. If you just group them together, you can't get anywhere where there are over 50% a majority of registered voters. At most, it's about a third in one of the precincts there. I would love to hear questions, and we can save that towards the end. But thank you so much for allowing me to talk about the Fair Representation Act. It'll probably be introduced in the next couple of weeks, and there'll be opportunities to reach out to your congressional member for support. Ro Khanna was a supporter of the Fair Representation Act. Scott Peters, it was sponsored by Don Beyer out of Virginia, as well as Jamie Raskin out of Maryland. So thank you so much for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for explaining that kind of the heart of the Fair Representation Act. I think it will be quite a transformative step in electoral politics as we know it. Yes, please do drop your questions in chat. Kate is capturing all your questions. We are running a bit ahead of time, so we actually will have a little bit more time at the end for conversations and discussions. So I'd like to now welcome our final speaker, and Trent Lange, who is actually the President and Executive Director of the California Clean Money Campaign. He has served on the CCMC board since 2003, and he has also been on executive committees of 5 ballot campaigns in California, including as co-chair of Measure H, which was the clean money measure in Los Angeles that passed quite amazingly by a 3-to-1 margin in 2011. Trent has led the campaign for AB 249, the California Disclose Act, and today he will be discussing SB 90 and SB 1416, the new Ballot Disclose Act. Welcome, Trent.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for that nice introduction, Nassim. Really glad to be with this great breakout session. I think it's illustrating all of the parts that are so crucial to getting fair elections, so that we have elections that are fair and government that is responsive to the people. So that's why the work that Pedro and Fair Vote are doing with the Fair Representation Act is so important, so that there actually are representation that reflects the number of people in a particular area, which it doesn't right now. A key part of that, though it doesn't go as far as the Fair Representation Act, but at a minimum, we need to get rid of basic gerrymandering. California has done a good job with that, with passing redistricting reform with the ballot proposition a number of years ago, but that's a problem in a lot of other states. We have to do things like protecting and increasing voting rights in general with things like automatic voter registration and early voting, vote by mail, et cetera. And again, these are things that California have taken a lead on, which is really great, but we have problems nationally still. So that's why I'll mention that the national bill HR 1, the For the People Act, which just passed the House of Representatives, it's got a real broad selection of crucial reforms of these natures. It does have some flaws, but these voting rights aspects and some of the other disclosure aspects and things like that are really, really important. I also, before I get into the part about disclosure we're focusing on, would be remiss to not mention the issue of election security. We do have the problem because our voting systems are secret software written by corporate, written and owned by corporate vendors. We don't really know how they're counting our votes. We don't really know, we can't really necessarily even say if they're counting them accurately. That's why we absolutely have to move to getting open source paper ballot voting systems so people can trust what the code is, so they're less likely to be hacked, et cetera. That's something that California Clean Money campaign has worked on in coalition with a number of groups like Brent Turner's and others groups on that. So that's something we've worked on. We're definitely going to have to be working on that going forward. But there's also the key aspect of what California Clean Money Campaign was created for, to focus on, was getting big money out of politics. And there are multiple important ways of doing that. The Citizens United, the horrible Citizens United decision just really unleashed the floodgates of corporate spending. That's why it's so important when we have new leaders coming into the legislature, like Assemblymember Lee, to be focused on stopping big special interest money from going and flooding into campaigns. That's the reason why bills, AB 20 and bills like it are very important to address. We definitely need to get public financing of campaigns in California. That is an absolutely crucial thing, and nationally too, because when, as Assemblymember Lee described, if candidates have to rely on raising large sums of money all the time, spend all their time fundraising, and a lot of them feel the need to take money from corporate interests or other big money interests, then that really distorts our election process and limits who can get elected. Because if you don't have those big money connections without public financing, you really don't have a chance in many cases, or it's much more difficult. So these are all parts of campaign finance reform that we absolutely need, that California Clean Money Campaign, and I know all of our allies and here, and new Assembly members like Assemblymember Lee are going to be working on with us and others. But what we've been focused on recently, because it's something that we can do now with the even with the Citizens United decision, is working on the problem of campaign disclosure, because it's going to be a little bit of a while before we can overturn Citizens United. It's something we absolutely have to do, and we're making progress through groups like Movies work and other groups nationally working on the problem. But in the meantime, we need to at least make sure people know who is trying to buy their votes. So with that, I'll share my screen here and describe a little bit what we've done. A lot of you I know already know some of the stuff that we've done, but also what we're doing. So let's see. Okay, just a second now. How do I do this? Look at this from the. Okay, so our main focus in the past couple of years, besides working on open source, has been fighting dark money in politics with the California Disclose Act, and now this year with the Ballot Disclose Act. So here's a brief history of what California has done in this regard. There was the bad old days when ballot measures and independent expenditure committees, these outside TAC ads, could spend millions and millions and millions of dollars with on-ad disclosures that were really buried in fine print and were allowed to give misleading information. So very little information. After literally a 7-year fight in the legislature, starting in 2011 and ending in 2017, we were able to pass the groundbreaking first in the nation California Disclose Act that required TV, radio, and print ads for ballot measures and independent expenditures to clearly and prominently show their top 3 funders with defined backgrounds, et cetera. No other state had done that at the time, and still I think California has the most clear description so people could see who was trying to buy their vote. And I'll give a couple examples after this. We followed that up because obviously TV, radio, and print aren't the only kinds of advertising these days, especially as social media gets more important. We worked with Assemblymember Kevin Mullen again, who was the author of AB 249, to pass the Social Media Disclose Act to require social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, to disclose the top 3 funders of those ads in consistent places. We worked with Assemblymember Sabrina Cervantes and Assemblymember Mullen in 2019 and got past the Text Message Disclose Act. Now, with text messaging being a new way that campaigns are reaching out. And before this bill, they didn't have to tell people at all who was texting you. With this bill, they have to clearly disclose that. And this year, we're working in the straight disclosure version on SB 752, Allen, the Disclosure Clarity Act, which I'll tell you about briefly next. So here's an example of the bad old days. This was an actual screenshot of the disclosures on a ballot measure ad in 2010. It's up there for 5 seconds on the screen. Good luck trying to figure out who was paying for that ad in 5 seconds while that's up there on the screen. And they got even trickier. Look at this one, same disclosure at the bottom. Look at that light gray off a white background. Again, good luck seeing who paid for that in 5 seconds or less, flashing on the screen. So we fought for 7 years to get television ads to look like this, so that the disclosures would be on the bottom 1/3 of the screen on a solid black background with each of the top 3 funders. So that on this particular ad, this was this one that we saw here. You might have noticed it was paid for by Stop Hidden Taxes, but with the Disclose Act in place, you clearly see that the major funding was by Chevron, Philip Morris, and Anheuser-Busch. So obviously that makes a big difference, I think, in voters, how they're going to interpret ads when it's not Stop Hidden Taxes, but they see that it's actually paid for by Chevron, Philip Morris, and Anheuser-Busch. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have been seeing these ads now on it just applies to California ballot measures and attack ad, independent expenditures for and against California candidates. We need to spread it nationwide. Unfortunately, HR 1 doesn't have this particular aspect yet. But the fight against tricky disclosure people continues. So in 2018, there were the first examples. This is what it's supposed to look like, nice and big and everything. We defined the size, the font size and everything. But then they did tricks like this, where they made it the fonts the right height, 4% of the height of the screen, but they made it super duper duper narrow, so you couldn't really see that, as you see again in 5 seconds. So we worked with Assemblymember Mullen and fixed that problem and said, you can't make the font super duper narrow, gosh darn it. Come on, people. So that helped, but now they are doing tricks like this, where they make the names of the committees that they're required to say so super long. As you see this, paid for by no one, Prop 10, Californians for Reasonable Housing and Coalition of Veterans, Seniors, Housing Providers, Social Justice Groups, Taxpayers Association of Labor, Committee Major Funding Fronts. It takes 4 lines, so it's going to be really hard for you to get down to the bottom 3 funders. So that's a trick that they're using now, despite how many strict rules we put in the California Disclose Act. They were doing those tricks. So we have a new bill that we're working on with Senator Ben Allen, who's been another clean money champion and Disclose Act leader. It's SB 752, called the Disclosure Clarity Act, that would just clean it up a little bit, right? You got to separate the top 3 funders at the bottom. So you can even have a big long name like this, it's separated. and make them yellow, and so that they stand out while making the name part white. Right. So you can see right here, just this simple little trick, which I'm sure they're going to fight us on. Just even this converts it from this, which is good luck reading in 5 seconds, to this, which you can clearly read. There's another example. There we go. Another thing that we saw is online ads. The California Disclose Act required, this was a part that we kind of had to compromise when we're passing the bill. So the bill only says in a contrasting color and font size that is easily readable by the average viewer. Whereas normally we say black backgrounds and stuff like that. These are Prop 22 ads from last year. They're plastered all over like every website. I'm sure you saw a whole bunch of these because Lyft and Uber spent over $200 million on these. Good luck seeing, they have a very different version of what's easily readable by the average viewer. Good luck seeing the disclosures there. So, so this bill will change it so that, okay, when you're on a large enough you have to put the disclosure in a solid white or a solid black background. Will give them flexibility. And they have to clearly show the name of at least the one top funder. Can't do 3 usually because it kind of fits in a way that stands out. So these are examples of how we kind of always have to fight the disclosure game to clear things up, which we will be doing. Okay, but the issue of money in politics, of who pays for political ads, isn't the only problem with ballot measure ads, right? Over $750 million was spent on ballot measure ads in 2020 alone, much of it by donors hiding behind these misleading names like Californians for Equal Rights, et cetera. And most ballot measures have information in the ballot pamphlet who paid for them. Trusted organizations like the League of Women Voters or AARP or ACLU or the California Teachers Association, et cetera. But the ballot pamphlet, as you know, is like over 100 pages long and really hard to read. Lots of people don't have time to read it or they forget. So we need to make sure people know that. We did some polling, California Clean Money Campaign did some polling and found that 79% of voters said it's important for them to know who supports and opposes ballot measures when they vote. Not surprising, I think we all want to know that. But only 42% said it's quick and easy to find those supporters and opponents in the voter guide, right? It's there, but most people don't think it's quick and easy. And I think they're kind of fibbing about that because it's not quick and easy even for me who've been doing it for years. And only 21% of voters say they're very confident they know the important supporters and opponents. And so this is one of the most important things to voters, and they don't know that. They just remember all the political ads. That's a real problem. So that's why we've introduced with Senator Henry Stern, SB 90, the Ballot Disclose Act, and we're announcing to CPA for the first time the introduction of a parallel bill. It's so important that Assembly Member Miguel Santiago, who worked with us on the open source bill a couple of years ago, and will, I'm sure, work with us on open source again, is introduced AB 1416, a parallel version. They're going to be the exact same language, but starting in different houses. One starting SB 90 starting in the Senate, AB 1416 starting in the Assembly, to double our chances because it's going to be a real fight. So here's this Prop 26 example again. This was a really big problematic proposition because it banned raising fees even on polluters without a 2/3 vote. And it passed with $18 million by the Stop Hidden Taxes. This is what was shown on the ballot back then, the title and summary, the 75-word title and summary. You can see it's written by the Attorney General. It's kind of in legalese. It's really hard for people to understand. People get confused. And if they're confused, they don't necessarily vote the right way. This is what SB 90 and AB 1416 would put in place instead. So adding to the bottom, supporters, and in this case, they would have seen supporters were the California Taxpayers Association, California Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business Action Committee, the Nisei Farmers League. Those were the ones that actually signed the ballot arguments before in the ballot pamphlet. But the opponents, League of Women Voters of California, American Lung Association, Sierra Club California, and the California League of Conservation Voters. This bad proposition that's still hurting California because we can't raise fees without 2/3 votes passed with only 52.5% of the vote. Might 3% of voters voted differently if they'd known that it was opposed by the League of Women Voters and the American Lung Association and Sierra Club and California League of Conservation Voters? I think that's very likely if people really knew who that was. So in our polling, just to show how incredibly effective this is, we actually did polling where we tested out a whole bunch of different ballot propositions, and one poll with the normal way of doing it with just the legalese, and then another poll with SB 90 and AB 1416, and asked them how they'd vote. Completely separate people, likely voters for an election. So this is a real cross section of Californians. And then later on we asked them, who do you trust? And what we found is without SB 90 or AB 1416, when a proposition was supported by one or more organizations a group trusted, a voter trusted, then 64% said they'd vote yes. This is, of course, without all the attack ads and things like that. But with SB 90, when they saw like the League of Women Voters, 73% said they'd vote yes, a 9% increase. And any consultant will tell you that a 9% increase is absolutely huge when it comes to things like this. So and whoops, there we go. And a similar increase when it comes, a decrease when a proposition is opposed by organizations that people don't trust. Opposed by organizations that people trust, a 10% decrease. So that Prop 26 case. Remember, it only won by 2%. Here we saw an even bigger percent difference when people see it's propositions are opposed. Quick examples in the last election, Prop 15, the split roll property tax that would have raised billions of dollars for schools and everything by increasing by making property taxes on commercial properties more fair, supported by lots of leading groups. It only lost by 2%. Voters would have seen that it was supported by the League of Women Voters, California Teachers Association, Latino Community Foundation. Prop 16, the ban on affirmative action, they would also have seen supported by League of Women Voters, California Teachers, and the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. That also barely lost. So you can see we'll have this sort of effect on just about everything. So this is going to be a big fight. The county clerks and election officials who actually print the ballots, they don't like it because they're worried about extra paper and so forth. They're being very, very short-sighted. So we'd ask you to go to www.yesfairelections.org to sign the petition and or email us at info@ceclean.org. And I know they're sharing these links in the chat. And watch for our action alerts. We passed the Disclose Act by a huge grassroots effort over a long period of time. That's going to be needed again this year and next year to help us keep fighting dark money and in general pass real campaign finance reform issues of the type we're talking about. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Trent. I want to quickly thank all of our speakers today, actually not just because of your presentations or for being with us, but for the essential work that you do every day in defending our democracy. So thank you for that. And we can go straight to our Q&A session. We actually have a lot of great questions lined up. So unfortunately, we don't have Assemblymember Alex Lee, but I'm sure that AB 20 questions can also be answered by Michele. So I'll go to all the questions that Kate has dutifully collected for us. I'll go ahead and start with Dawn's question. They ask, do you support a constitutional amendment to state that political money is not First Amendment protected speech and that only human beings have constitutional rights? That sounds like a yes and no question. So we'll have all of you answer. Go ahead. Michele, we'll start with you.
That's why MOVI, Money Out Voters Informed, is exactly for that amendment. And there are good bills that have been introduced since Citizens United, since the decision came out, every year in the Congress and the Senate. So 100% yes.
Trent, how about you?
Absolutely, we need to have that. It's going to be a fight. We're making progress, but yeah, that's crucial.
Pedro?
Yeah, this isn't one of the issue areas that Fair Vote weighs in and works on, just because we are so concerned with electoral reform on what it means in terms of geography. But personally, I support that.
Thank you. The next question, I'm not sure who it's from, but it was during Alex Lee's session, maybe Mike Feinstein. The question is, did you know that HR 1 has a poison pill to get rid of minor parties? Anyone would like to answer that question or address it?
I mean, yes, I do know, I did know that is in there. I don't know what else to say to that. What's also in HR 1 and S1 are the nonpartisan citizen committees on redistricting. And if Pedro's bill is implemented, that looks like an invitation for third parties. So, you know, obviously, this Congress is not perfect, but with groups on like Fair Vote already working on the antidote to that, I think there's value in the protections for democracy that HR 1 and S1 have.
There is a follow-up by Mike Feinstein as well, and the question is, why can't we get proportional representation for Congress and ranked choice voting for president in HR 1 instead of Democrats using HR 1 to eliminate competition from parties like the Green Party? Anyone would like to address that?
I'm sure Mike Feinstein knows that my answer would be money in politics. So whatever anyone else would like to say about that, you know.
Go ahead, Pedro.
Yeah, so Fair Vote wasn't part of those. What I understand were like pretty long and careful negotiations. I sympathize with Mike on that. Wasn't the outcome that really seems beneficial for the Green Party, and that was just not. There was a lot of things that were balanced, I suppose. There are a lot of great things that HR 1 did, and there were a couple clauses that I think that presented issues like the one that Mike raised, and I think it's good that Mike continues to raise that issue. The sort of fixes to the current state of democracy and getting it just to where it was maybe even 10 years ago was, I think, what largely folks were focused on with HR 1 is like, how do we just get back to a pre-Shelby world in many ways? And the John Lewis Act, I think, is part of that formula as well. I think what we're trying to do with the Fair Representation Act is something that I would be an invitation for Green Party, for third parties across, and it would also be an invitation for more moderate Republicans, to be frank, and you know, more opportunities for Democrats in rural parts of the country. But I think that's a different conversation that I think the one that was being had around HR 1 and just how to improve access generally when it comes to that voter being able to cast the ballot. But I'm hoping that this conversation around our democracy continues to be had and deliberated.
And I'll mention that this is one of the examples of why we need filibuster reform in the Senate. It's going to be incredibly hard to pass HR 1. I mean, sadly, we actually have gotten some bipartisan, a little bit of bipartisan support. Some Republicans have supported our Disclose Act bills after they heard from hundreds and hundreds of constituent phone calls and things like that. But in Congress, they've just drawn a hard line against any sort of electoral reform or fair elections reform, or much less campaign finance reform or proportional representation, even simple redistricting reform. And the filibuster with the 60 vote rule just makes that impossible. There's not going to be any way that the Democrats will be able to pass that in the Senate unless they do something about the filibuster. And the other thing about the filibuster is, even when there's these miracles happen, like the ACA, which was, obviously not the be all and end all of healthcare reform. We need a lot better than that. But because of the filibuster rules, there's like no way you can pass another bill to fix an important aspect of it, much less a much bigger thing like single payer, for instance. If they get the filibuster removed, then it'll be a lot easier to not only pass something huge like HR 1, but also then to push through fixes like proportional representation and some of the other things that are shortcomings of HR 1 to get those fixed, because you just need a majority of the vote. And that's, believe me, that's hard enough. We all know that is plenty hard, especially given the problems of money in politics, et cetera, and also the way people are voted. But at least filibuster reform would help with that. So when that comes up, I would encourage folks to help encourage filibuster reform. Well, our own Senator Feinstein isn't a big fan of it at the moment, so she may need to hear from people too.
Thank you. There is a petition by the Green Party and the Howie Hawkins, I think, organizations that are demanding an amendment to HR 1 to remove the campaign financing section while keeping the great voting rights sections that are necessary. So I just dropped that in the chat as well. The next question is from Ken Warfield. He asked, do the Democrats surrender because they are afraid they will isolate often the same donors that both parties need to compete? He asked that question during Michelle's session. So Michele, would you please respond to that?
I think that certainly is a big part of it. I often use the Ralph Nader quote from a couple of decades ago, but it's still very true, which is the Republican Party has been bought and the Democratic Party has been bought more cheaply. And I think that pretty much sums up the Democratic Party, and it helps explain, their rhetorical behavior versus their legislative actions. And we can't help but observe that they appear to be a bit schizophrenic, and to combine this with the questions Mike Feinstein was asking, it's, both parties are not only corporate parties, but actually corporations. You may remember that the Democratic Party defended a lawsuit about the 2016, or maybe it was I think it was the 2016 primary, saying that they had no obligation to conduct a fair election because they were, in fact, a corporation. And the corporate overtake, you can chart it back not only to the decisions which led to Citizens United, like Buckley v. Vallejo and Bellotti v. the Bank of Boston, but also remember that it used to be that presidential debates were overseen by the League of Women Voters. And then the corporate parties took that away from them, and now even that is run by corporations. So yes, Ken, yes, and yes, it's a big problem.
Thank you. Here's a question for Pedro. Mike Feinstein asked, how big would the House have to be to have a minimum of 3 House seats in every state? So every state would have a minimum of at least 1 3-seat RCV election.
You're asking me to do some quick math. I have that somewhere. I can get that to you, Mike. But there are different ways to kind of think about what kind of an expansion could be done, right? You could you can kind of fix the congressional size based on like the state with with one seat and what that population is, and try to create seats based on that population across the country. There's also other issues that may come up, like a state might have like 9 congressional seats, and a question arises like, should we let them do 9-seat RCV, STV? Those conversations are thoughts that we're having at Fair Vote internally about like what kind of sorts of tweaks here and there would be sort of acceptable in making democracy much more reflective and representative. But I appreciate that question. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. I'll go to Ken. He asked, do you think RCV could be ruled unconstitutional because of the current Citizens United ruling that RCV interferes with free speech?
No. Every single case that's been brought, every constitutional claim that has been raised about RCV has not been upheld, meaning that every aspect of ranked choice voting so far has proven to be constitutional. And the case that I would refer folks to that kind of is pretty exhaustive in the legal arguments thrown at it is the Dudham case out of the Ninth Circuit, actually challenging San Francisco's use of ranked choice voting, where they threw one person, one vote at it. And that is a redistricting question, actually. They threw an equal protection claim at it. But every voter has the opportunity to rank the ballot, right? So I see no legal issues with constitutional issues regarding ranked choice voting.
One more question for you from Don. Pedro, how do we convince the governor to sign the Fair Representation Act?
Well, it wouldn't be up to him and right now. And some people did mention Senate Bill 212, the local options bill that that was vetoed by the governor. Trent, thank you for your support and Clean Money Campaign support of that. It had a broad coalition that included the ACLU, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Dolores Huerta Foundation, and we tried to do everything we could to try to get the governor to sign on and sign it. And I thought the veto message was instructive, meaning we're going to take the governor for what he said on his veto message, which was we need to study ranked choice voting more, which is what I'm hoping what California does going forward, which is study the reform, have a commission look at it, look at the way voters are engaging with the ballot, look at the way it's improving democracy, and take into account the turnout differentials that exist between the primary and the general as well, and what that really means for California democracy. When you have so many incumbent county supervisors being elected in these low turnout primaries, that's an issue, and that is being taken up right now. And that was a conversation starter that I think our bill helped start, which is this is an issue when you have all these incumbents being elected and not being held accountable to a larger electorate. I'm hoping that, and I'm optimistic that as more cities and charter cities across California adopt ranked choice voting, that the governor will have a change of heart. But really, it's I'm taking it for like, let's have an engagement and a conversation about it, because I'm not giving up on that yet.
Thank you. Roshan asks, can we work on passing the 28th amendments and have the different links to the 2000 election and voting videos? Also asking, have you heard of the 28ers about reforming 28th amendment? What are your thoughts? Maybe we'll start with Michele, go to Trent.
Yes, I remember the 28ers. They helped us quite a lot, especially in our 2014 push. So California has really done all that it can do other than educating people about why we need a 28th Amendment, which is one of the things that MOVI tries to do. The call for the amendment was passed through the California legislature. The California legislature put the call for the amendment on the ballot. That passed. California is one of I think, 4 states that's voted by popular vote to do this, but there are 18 other states whose legislatures have called on the Congress for a 28th Amendment. That's an enormous number of states, right? So 22 states in all have already taken action. There are countless other states that have taken municipal actions. Some states are barred from putting a voter instruction or a referendum on their statewide ballots, but it has gone, you know, for example, in 2016, I think Wisconsin passed it in 90 cities. You know, we suffer from the fact that billionaire media doesn't want to talk about this issue, so nobody really knows how vast the movement is. John Nichols at one point called this the most dynamic, uncovered movement in America. If you go to the MOVI website, moneyoutvotersin.org, you can actually see the map that will show you exactly what states have done what. And I think there are only 7 states, and you can imagine who they are, who have taken no action on overturning Citizens United. So, you know, we've got an issue which is, as we're seeing play out in everything from the act that was just passed by the Senate this morning, that Republicans are not interested in helping. And when you look at how we elect Congress members and all of these things that we're talking about, and the, you know, Fair Representation Act could be key in this, because the truth is, if you want to pass an amendment in the way that all of our amendments have been passed, right? There are 2 ways to do it. One's through the Congress and then state ratification, and the other's through a constitutional convention and then state ratification. We've always used the path through the Congress and then state ratification, but you're going to need 292 members of Congress to do that. And they are probably not going to be coming from the Republican Party, or at least the Republican Party in its current form. So if there were other kinds of parties participating in addition to the Democratic Party, obviously the Green Party would support such a thing. So that's kind of our, you know, the eye on the electoral prize is 292 votes in the Congress and 67 votes in the Senate. So if we can get to that, we will have our amendment. Pramila Jayapal is the author of the, I consider, best version of a constitutional amendment in the Congress, and I think it's called the We the People. There's so many, you know, for the people, we the people, whatever people, but it's one of those. And she has, you know, she's obviously a tremendous progressive voice in the Congress, and progressives are beginning to wield more power. And in fact, you know, recently they reorganized. It used to be that there were 2 chairs of the Progressive Caucus, Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, and they realized that they were not nimble enough in that 2-chair system, because they would have to check with one another in order to act. So Mark Pocan very graciously stepped aside, and Pramila Jayapal is the leader of the Progressive Caucus. And I think, you know, that is a growing caucus, and we keep adding incredible voices like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. And, you know, let's keep doing that by enacting all of these things that all of us have been talking about this afternoon. Okay, I hope that's comprehensive. So yes, 28th Amendment, let's go. And if the 28ers, you know, I haven't seen any of those folks in a while, please get in touch with me, Michele at moneyoutvotersin.org.
Thank you. Maybe I'll move on to the next question and bring in Trent on that. Both Kate and Paul are asking about publicly financed campaigns and elections. Can public financing be explained briefly?
Can be explained. Well, I mean, the one of the biggest problem, probably the biggest problem of the current system, is that candidates have to go out and raise money. If you cannot raise hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in many cases, it's very difficult to get your voice out and compete. And of course, who are the people that want to give you that money with some rare exceptions like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who were able to raise. They're so famous and well known, and people were so excited about them, they were able to raise a lot of small donations. But with rare exceptions like that, candidates have to raise their money from people who can write checks for thousands of dollars, or even people who can write checks for hundreds of dollars are not necessarily the average, lower middle class person who usually can't afford to do that. So public financing solves that. I mean, there are multiple different ways of doing public financing of campaigns, but all of them are meant to amplify the voice of the regular voters. In California, we have the cities of Los Angeles and San Francisco that have relatively small dollar matching fund systems. They're not full public financing systems, but they help. So that in LA, if you up to the first $100, maybe $115, I think it is now, you get a 6-to-1 match on that. So $100 contribution is worth the same as a $700 contribution. So that helps magnify the voice of small donors. That's what's in HR1, the For the People Act, in Congress right now. Other places have, Seattle has a voucher system, small dollar voucher system, where every single voter in Seattle is given several $25 vouchers that they can give to the candidate of their choice. So that way people can afford to give, even if they can't afford to give $25, they have a voucher they can give the candidate of their choice. And then other states like Maine and Connecticut and Arizona have full public clean money style public financing systems where candidates who qualify by getting a certain number of $5 contributions usually get equal grants of money. And I know that's something the Green Party supports because then all candidates have the same amount of money. There's definitely good reasons for that. So those are the kinds of public financing. All of them would dramatically limit the influence of big money in politics. Limit the influence of big money in politics, and B, give candidates that don't have a lot of money or a lot of rich or special interest friends a better chance to run. Now, for those reasons, it's not easy to pass. California Clean Money Campaign we've tried to pass it twice, once in a ballot measure in 2006 in California that failed, once the California Fair Elections Act in 2010 that came closer, but it still fell a little bit short. In California, it would require a ballot measure to expand to the state and to normal non-charter cities. So it will be a big fight. We have to do it at the right time. That's part of the reason why we're so interested in passing the California Disclose Act to defend it on the ballot. HR1 would help nationally, though it's got some problems. So it's crucial to everything to get and the dominance of big money politics, but it's going to be a big fight, and we're going to need all progressives to work together and work with everybody else to help it pass when it's the right time.
Thank you. We have just 4 minutes left, and I'll go down to a question Kate asks, which is, what is the best way to get popular vote to count, since California, New York, and Texas equals the population of the rest of the country, and Democrats will always win in California, New York, and even Texas is getting more progressive. So maybe a quick round, starting with Pedro, about what is the best way to get there to the popular vote?
The interstate compact. So it's been an ongoing conversation, and I think you can go to nationalpopularvote.com and find out more information, but it's pieces of legislation that pass on a state by state level saying that once the popular vote is determined, that all the electors who constitute a majority of the electoral seats would cast their ballot in direction of the popular vote. I think that's the shortcut and the most politically feasible thing right now, outside of a constitutional amendment, which I think Michele had alluded to would take a lot of work to get something like that done. So we're looking towards the states actually in doing that, and Fair Vote has been a supporter of that proposal. So if you'd like to find out more, I would visit. There are other proposals out there, but I think the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is what folks have been working on the longest.
Do you happen to know, or any of you happen to know, how many states have considered it or come close?
Yeah, I don't have all of the stats right off the top of my head at this very moment, but it's been enacted by, I think, 15 states. It's totaled up to 196 electoral votes right now. I just read that on nationalpopularvote.com. So let me just post that in the. Oh,
Yeah, if you drop it in the chat, I'll transfer it. Thank you. That's a good point. Did Michele, Trent, did you have a brief comment about that? We have a couple of more questions left, and we have 1 minute.
I'll just mention that I absolutely agree with Pedro. The National Popular Vote is really, really important. California Clean Money Campaign supported that when it was coming up in California. It has made a lot of progress. It's up to 196. It's going to be a little bit harder since it's in more purpley states have to pass it, but we should definitely all support our friends and national groups when they're making those efforts in other states, because a constitutional amendment will be very hard, especially since Republicans seem to not want to get rid of the National Popular Vote.
Exactly.
Which is interesting because John Kerry actually came very close to winning the presidency, even though he lost the National Popular Vote. So it has mostly bit Democrats recently, with Gore and Hillary Clinton, but it can go the other way. So but
that's not counting what happened in Ohio, Trent, right? That National Popular Vote count, right? Because all those votes were shipped down to Kentucky. Right.
Well, what happened? Yeah, I mean, Kerry maybe should have won Ohio, anyways. But with a fugitive vote split, he would have won the presidency, even though he would have still lost the National Popular Vote. So it shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be every vote in the country should count the same, no matter what state you live in. That's really the key thing. The National Popular Vote is probably the best way. Compact is probably the best way of doing that.
And I'll add that, like, we can kind of look back in time, but I think it's also important to consider in the way it would actually change campaigning. Like, no longer would we just focus on swing states. We might have Democrats spending time in Alabama, in Louisiana, and Republicans spending time in California.
Yeah.
We have to think about how that would actually change the dynamics of that particular election as well. And I think having politicians visit more voters is not going to be a bad thing for democracy.
Yeah, terrific point.
Well,
and Democrats, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Michele.
I was just going to say, Democrats might come to California for something other than money. So, yeah, right.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say another great big thank you to our speakers, Trent Lange, Michele Sutter, and Pedro Hernandez, and also Assembly Member Lee, who spent some time in another breakout session already. I think it's time for us to go back. We're going to end this breakout session so everybody gets to go back to the main stage and see what's happening there. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us and all your wonderful questions. Hopefully you got lots of information and some contacts to reach out to our speakers. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So long,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.